Right, let's just address the elephant in the Zoom room, shall we? You spend 40 hours a week, sometimes more, making someone else rich, only for them to treat you like a rather inconvenient stain on the corporate carpet. I'm talking about the toxic workplace, the subtle undermining, the outright bully boss who thinks their bad mood is a valid management style. You're not alone in that miserable club. But here is where my story takes a rather satisfying turn. I was there, trapped under a truly dreadful employer who seemed to believe that the rulebook was purely optional. They thought I'd just roll over and quietly disappear. Bless their cotton socks. They were tragically mistaken. Instead of blowing thousands on some silk-scarfed solicitor, I did something far more effective. I leveraged 7 specific, utterly infuriating, but perfectly legal strategies. Strategies so obscure, so devastatingly effective, that they are genuinely the corporate world's best kept secret. I used these 7 hidden legal levers to turn the tables, not just to escape, but to make my former employer pay for their transgressions, literally. The final bill for their incompetence and poor conduct, a rather magnificent £25,000 settlement, all achieved without the crippling fees and endless stress of a formal tribunal. Now, I can hear the cynics from here. That's fine for you, but I don't know the first thing about law. Perfect. That's why you're here. This isn't a dry legal lecture. This is the no-nonsense, step-by-step playbook they hope you never find. It's the cheeky insider's guide to using the system's own hidden mechanics against the people who wrote them. We're going to dive deep into these specific strategies that, when combined, create an absolute headache for any large company. These are the tools that force them to settle quickly and quietly. If you are currently in the trenches, feeling helpless and angry, this video is your tactical guide. We're going to break down the specific legal weapons I deployed to secure my rights and my substantial payout. Because your rights are protected by law, even if your boss seems to think they're above it. Stick with me, because in the next section we are immediately diving into the action. All right. Ready? Let's first set the stage. Every good horror story needs a villain, and mine arrived about a year after I did into the job. Let's call him the adversary. Now, the adversary was one of those people who genuinely believed that charisma was a sign of weakness. He arrived looking distinctly like he'd been styled by a rather unforgiving 1940s barber. You know the look. Perfectly slicked hair that barely moved, and a small, rather severe strip of upper lip foliage that just screamed authoritarian. If you ever needed a manager who could instantly kill that good atmosphere in a room, you'd found him. He was colder than a January sea swim of Brighton Pier. I'd been in the company for ages, working diligently, especially under the great COVID remote work hangover. Like many sensible adults, I had an informal handshake arrangement with my company that if I finished my core work for the day, I could happily duck out an hour or two early to beat the traffic and finish up my remaining hours from the comfort of my own sofa. A perfectly reasonable, productive boosting legacy system. Then came the adversary. Our first clash happened about a month into his reign of terror. I'd logged off, I was home, cup of tea in hand, feeling perfectly smug about my efficiency. Then, ping! It was an email. Not a friendly check-in, mind you. No, this was a missile, lobbed straight over the digital fence. Subject, departure time. And he asked in the email, please immediately explain why you logged off. At 15 hours today, this is an official request. No pleasantries, no phone call to verify the arrangement, just a demand. It was abrupt, rude, and honestly staggeringly presumptuous. He hadn't checked the facts, he just went straight for the jugular, assuming I was some sort of work-shirking delinquent. Did I panic? Absolutely not. My reply was probably the calmest email I've ever written. I simply pointed out, with a sort of detached politeness that truly maddens petty bureaucrats, that my work was completed and that I'd clocked the final hours from home, as always. That calm response was the moment the war started. He was expecting submission. He got a polite, firmly placed foot in the door. He instantly knew I wasn't going to be the easy employee he could push around. And trust me, that email exchange, it became a crucial piece of evidence later on. Remember that detail, because the 7 strategies we're about to discuss, a lot of them are about collecting the evidence that turns your employer's pettiness into your profit. So After that initial skirmish of the email incident, there was a brief, awkward truce. I agreed temporarily to come into the office full-time, simply to deny the adversary the petty satisfaction of finding more reasons to send accusatory emails in my direction. So the first crucial tip, and this becomes before everything, is before you get into any dispute, make sure you know how long you've been working at the company. Because in the UK, there's a time where it becomes a lot harder to just dismiss you. And usually, as far as I know at the moment, it's 2 years. But you need to check this. If you've been working for under 2 years, then it's usually a lot easier for them, for your company, to just get rid of you. So at the time of watching this video, you need to ask yourself, how long have I been working here? Look at your contract, because that determines your strategy massively. I figured I'd wait for the dust to settle, the corporate equivalent of holding your breath. But life, as it often does, had other ideas. My mother became quite poorly. Suddenly, those couple of hours of flex time weren't about beating traffic. They were about spending precious, crucial time with family. This wasn't a preference, it was a necessity. So I did the entirely correct, entirely formal thing. I submitted something called a flexible working request. Now, for those outside the UK, this isn't some vague plea. It's a specific, legally protected application. Companies have a duty to take it seriously, especially when it's tied to compassionate grounds. It's supposed to be a lifeline. I hand-delivered this request to the adversary, that man with the unforgiving haircut. I explained the situation with my mom clearly and professionally, and what does UK law say? The law that is supposed to protect us? It says very clearly, he has a maximum of 3 months to deal with it. Either way, whether he approves it or denies it, but he has to deal with it. And he has to deal with it reasonably. And the recommended response time within 20 days, to say that they've received the request and they're looking into it. So my request ended up going into the black hole. 20 days passed. Silence. 40 days passed. Crickets. After 2 solid months of staring at a blank calendar slot where a response should have been, I asked him, very calmly, what the status was with my request. Yes, we are still looking into it, he said dismissively. Still looking into it? The man could solve a Rubik's Cube blindfolded faster than he could action that basic HR request. A few more weeks went by. I asked again. Same response. Still looking into it, still considering the request, thank you. That's when the penny dropped. This wasn't incompetence. It was a deliberate, utterly spiteful act of professional malice. He wasn't considering it. He was ignoring it. He was using a critical, legally protected lifeline as another tool of control and bullying. He was banking on the fact that I wouldn't know the law well enough to challenge him on his refusal to even process the request. And this, my friends, is the second crucial misstep your employer might make. He breached a clear statutory duty. He thought he was just being rude, but in the eyes of the law, he was laying the groundwork for his eventual £25,000 downfall. Keep that date stamped in your head. The second tip is know your flexible working request regulation. So any employee can submit a flexible working request. The employer doesn't have to grant it, but they have to deal with it reasonably. And a lot of employers completely mess this up because they don't really understand the regulations or rules themselves. So the benefit of this is requesting this flexible working is you might genuinely actually need it, such as in my case. But some employees who are in the middle of a dispute have been known to strategically insert a flexible working request right in the middle of the dispute because they know employers are likely to completely mess it up, and that becomes one more thing or one more rule they broke, makes the tribunal case even stronger. So we've established the adversary's spite. He ignored a legally protected request concerning my ill mother. Petty, yes, but he clearly felt he hadn't fully flexed his authoritarian muscles yet. He needed a confrontation, a spectacle. It was about 10 in the morning. I was deep in my actual work, being productive, when the next missile arrived in my inbox. A meeting request, 1 hour from now, his office. Subject line, blank, no context, no agenda, just the corporate equivalent of be there. Now, a smart employee knows that when a bully manager summons you to an unexplained immediate meeting, it's an ambush. I replied immediately, "What is the purpose of this meeting?" His response, "Oh, you don't need to know now. I'll tell you when you get there." Oh, the sheer arrogance, the nerve. I insisted, and finally he spat out the reason. The meeting was an investigation into my conduct, specifically my starting and finishing times, the exact issues he thought he'd squashed with me months ago. I was livid, not because I was guilty, but because of the sheer disrespect. We settled this issue. We had an agreement that I was no longer going to be working from home, and he was happy with it. Why is he investigating me again for the same thing? This was a transparent attempt to interrupt my day, ruin my focus, and intimidate me, all for a legacy arrangement he'd refused to formalize. So I strolled into his office. He was sitting behind his desk, trying desperately to look imposing. He had a clipboard, the type, the essential prop for any man attempting to project authority he hasn't yet earned. He launched straight into it, reading his script, asking his first question about my whereabouts on a specific day. I answered it calmly, but then I stopped. I looked at him, clipboard and all, and realized I had absolutely zero professional respect for this man or his amateur dramatics. I put my hand up. I said, "Listen," I told him, "I'm not answering another single question. I do not recognize this farcical investigation, and I have absolutely no respect for what he's trying to do here." The air went thick. There was an uncomfortable 10-second silence. The air went thick. His face, already prone to looking like a clenched fist, went a spectacular shade of angry red. He was genuinely shocked. Bullies rely on fear, and I just handed him nothing but disdain. He sputtered and threatened, "I'll report you to the directors immediately. This is gross insubordination." And I looked at him and said, "You do whatever you think you need to do, buddy." I said, "But let me tell you something. I am more valuable to this company than you are. They'll get rid of you first." And then I simply told him to clear off. The conversation was over. He literally scrambled out of the room, charging down the corridor. I watched through the glass partition as he burst into the director's office, arms waving wildly, practically vibrating with rage. He looked precisely like an enraged orangutan who just lost his favorite banana. He was humiliated, and he knew it. What he didn't know was that this ambush meeting, his refusal to state the agenda, and his failure to give me the right to be accompanied, those weren't just terrible management. They were 3 massive legal breaches that handed me all the ammunition I needed. That, my friends, is where the £25,000 started to look very achievable. So let's summarize things so far, because at this point, this is when I decided I was going to leave this company. In my eyes, when something like this happens, when you are bullied in your job, there will come a time fairly early on where you have to decide, am I going to stay in this job and build bridges and fix things and basically submit, or am I going to fight this and leave? You can't do both. You can't fight and stay. I think that's going to be very difficult. So I decided, okay, I'm going to leave, but I'm going to go out all guns blazing, and I'm going to take my rightful compensation. Okay? And the first thing I did was put a grievance in. And the reason I decided to put a grievance in is because it disrupts everything. It stops all the investigations, all the other scheming they're doing behind the scenes. All that stops. And they have to focus on my grievance. That's the first objective. And the second objective is I wanted to put the issues I had on record, because I can't go to a tribunal without having put in a grievance, because the judge will just say, well, did you tell your company what problems you had? And you can't just say, oh yeah, I mentioned it to somebody in the corridor. It has to be official on the books. And the second benefit of a grievance is that it's one of the things you have to do before you reach a tribunal, because judges have been known to possibly even dismiss cases, but definitely reduce the level of compensation for an employee, who skipped going through the grievance procedure at their company. You have to tick off the grievance procedure and get a no before you go to a tribunal. So that's the second benefit of it. So my grievance, I had a lot of issues. The first one was the flexible working request. That was dealt with extremely poorly. They never even acknowledged they received it. I hadn't had a decision in months. It was basically put in a black hole, and I haven't heard anything. That's the first thing. The second thing is I had a feeling that one of the senior directors was collaborating or colluding with this manager against me. So basically she was feeding him information about the times I come in and leave to him, and then he would be hit attack dog to go after me. So that was going in behind my back, and my argument was that director, I was working at their branch, if they had a problem with me coming and going at certain times, they should have come to me. That just showed me that there was no relationship between us, because why would you do it? Why would you just go over to HR straight away without discussing the issue directly with your employer, with your employee? So that was the second issue. And the third thing was the manner of his ambush meetings, kind of sending me a meeting request out of the blue, no forewarning, no, doesn't tell me the agenda, doesn't give me the right to bring a colleague, which is something they should offer. It was just so bad and so hostile. You are creating a hostile working environment. That's actually an offence under UK law. And one of my arguments was the working environment was really hostile to me. They refusing my flexible working request. They haven't actually refused. They haven't even acknowledged it. And the second thing was this hostile work environment. And I submitted the grievance. And we'll see where they go with that. The next step is to submit a grievance. I've just explained what the benefits of a grievance, submitting a grievance is, so I'm not going to go over that. But what I will say is, in 99% of cases, even if you submit a grievance, the employer are going to find that they did absolutely wrong, because, to be honest, the whole process is a complete sham. They are investigating themselves effectively, and they're not going to say, we did this wrong, because that really opens them up to maybe an even bigger tribunal claim. So 99% of the time, don't expect anything, but go through all the stages. Submit the original grievance. They'll probably reject it 9 times out of 10. Then submit the appeal. They're going to dismiss the appeal. If there's a second appeal, go for it. Completely exhaust that process. And the other benefit is it buys you more time. Like in my case, I wasn't actually at 2 years of employment. I was about a year and maybe 6 months. So I still had 6 months. So it was in my interest to use the time it takes to process the grievance to get me over that 2-year milestone where I have a lot more rights, and it's a lot harder to just dismiss me.